Welcome to the Groove Pod, where two cousins and lovers of music explore their journeys through audio and listening to music, and specifically explore whether or not it's worth going down the path of vinyl in this digital age. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the show. All right, we're back with another episode, and I'm going to launch straight into it. So I sort of teased at the end of the last episode, Nick, that I had a little nugget about Joni Mitchell, because you mentioned Joni Mitchell last time. I've just finished reading a book called This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. And it's a really interesting book. It goes through how our brains process music, and when you first get into a new genre, like if you've never been into, I think opera's mentioned in the book, and I'm one of those that I'm not really into opera. He says that he was never into opera, but then someone or other he knew was heavily involved, like his father-in-law or somebody, and so he was exposed to it over an extended period of time and grew to love it. And he explains the mechanisms in there of things like how is it that we start to learn and adapt to different music. And it's all about brains forming what he calls schemas, where we start to know what to expect in the music because we've heard it enough times before that our brain goes, oh yeah, when this happens, then this is likely to happen, and then that's likely to happen. And then
is that like preempting a chorus or preempting a bridge or something?
Yeah, and even melodic phrases, and like the way in pop music that we're all used to, or jazz, or it doesn't have to be pop, but in what I'll call Western music, which is what most of our audience are probably going to be familiar with, the way we'll always tend to resolve back to the root chord of and the key signature that it was in. And so what he then explains is the fact that the way good composers, good songwriters, etc., make music exciting and interesting is then they play with those expectations. They subvert our expectations in fun ways by holding back a rhythm a little bit longer, or by going in a direction we didn't expect, and that's when we're like, oh, that's fun. So anyway, that's what the book's about. But he's been around the music industry for a long time. He's a neuroscientist that studies the brain and hearing and perception and stuff, but he's obviously got a lot of contacts in music. He plays music himself. I think he studied at one of the musical places as well along his way. And he somehow got to know Joni Mitchell. And so he talks about having sat down with Joni Mitchell, and one of the things that she does in her music creation is that she would tune the guitar strings to whatever notes she wanted. So she wasn't doing it based on a normal key signature. She would tune them to how she wanted. And she also didn't write the music. She just played. So she wasn't, I think if I'm remembering it correctly, she was not a formally trained musician. She was someone that was just self-taught and just expressed what she felt. And so what it led to, and this was the key point I mentioned last time and sort of teased last time, it made it very difficult for a lot of other musicians to play with her. Particularly, he talks about bass players. And he said that she would go into a studio recording, or they'd be setting up for a concert, and she'd have musicians there, and the bass player would say, well, what's the, I can't think of the right term. What do you call it? The main note?
The root note? Or?
The root, yeah, the root.
Yeah.
The root of each chord. They want to know what the root note is, because generally bass players will work around the root of each chord. And what he was saying was that she didn't know, because she wasn't doing formal chords. She was just playing what felt good and sounded good. And the problem was that by having bass players trying to tie her music to a root note each time, it would actually mess with the harmonic richness that she was creating by not having root notes, because she could wander anywhere with the chords she was using. And apparently, I think, is it Jaco Pastorius? Yeah, from Weather Report and solo fame as well. Apparently he was both a difficult person to be around, but also B, was one of the few bass players that Joni worked really well with, because he was comfortable just hearing what was going on and going where it went. He didn't need to know, or what's the root of this chord and which chord are we moving to next. He would just go with the music. And I thought that was just really interesting, because I think about musicians at that level, like your pro musicians that have got a really big name for themselves. And I always figure they must be people that are really, not necessarily musical geniuses, but really solid technical musicians, that they understand the chords and the progressions and the, like, what they're doing and when they're doing it at a technical level. But what comes up in that book is that Joni Mitchell was just one of many, I think Stevie Wonder was mentioned as well, where they weren't traditionally trained musicians. They were people that had a gift for it and pursued it and explored as they went. And I just thought that was a really interesting, particularly the Joni Mitchell thing, like so unusual to tune the notes of the guitar, not in some sort of standard fifths arrangement or anything like that. It was just, I'm going to put this note, and this note in the open strings and then play with that. And so it creates all different harmonic combinations that you would never get with a traditionally tuned guitar.
Yeah, and as you were telling me that, I'm typing into ChatGPT, Copilot, sorry. What are some of Joni Mitchell's, alternate guitar tunings? And it's just given me like the first 7 here is that when she plays Big Yellow Taxi live, it's open D, but open D is what we often call it as like DAD-GAD, which is which is D-A-D-G-A-D, but she's got D-A-D F sharp A-D. So that's interesting. Then in both sides now, it's referred to as Joni's tuning, E, B, E, G sharp, B, E.
Wow.
So that's fascinating. I mean, that's a B chord. That's an open B, open B major, but just I've never seen that. And then open B flat in A Case for You, B flat F, B flat, E flat F, B flat.
The thing that blows my mind is it means that every single time she's using a different tuning, her brain knows instinctively where the notes are that she needs, because no longer is it a case of your muscle memory that my guitar is always tuned like this. So if I'm playing an E sharp major 7th chord, I'm going to do this. That's not the case, because from one string tuning to the next, it's all different. It's fascinating.
I'm going to listen out for that more.
Yeah, I actually want, since I've read that, I've wanted to go back and re-listen to a couple of her albums and just see if I can hear what it's doing to the music, but I haven't had the time to do it yet.
You also teased the audience as well, that you were about to head out and buy some vinyl records.
Yes, and I did.
And you did tell me the 3 records that you bought. I think it was 3, right?
Yeah, I bought 3, and I remembered I actually had 2 more here that I'd never opened because I hadn't had a turntable. They were given to me on my 21st birthday. So that's how long they've been sitting in storage. And they're still fine.
That's like 60, 70 years.
Yeah, exactly. And they're still completely fine. So what I purchased was, and so the purchasing process was not scientific. It was not researched. It was, I'm going to walk into JB Hi-Fi, which is one of our local hi-fi stores here in Australia. I'm going to walk in there. I had my son Xander with me, so I also couldn't take too long about it.
Very long.
The little one. And so I walked in and I just looked for albums that I knew well and that I had a digital copy of, and or that I thought would be a good recording in some way. And so what I ended up with was, and 1 or 2 of them may have been put back because of price, and I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Because pricing was horrendous. I ended up with Bernard Fanning, Tea and Sympathy. So Bernard Fanning's ex-lead singer of Powderfinger, great Aussie band. He's got a fantastic voice, but also songwriting style.
I think that was his first solo album post Powderfinger too.
I think it might have been, yeah. Yep. It's got a really interesting kind of pop folk feel for those that haven't heard his style. I'd call it pop folk, but it's not going heavily into folk. Like he's still got there's a bit of weight behind it. Let's put it that way. It's not airy fairy lightweight folk. And I'm not saying anything negative about folk overall. I actually really enjoy folk music, but there's a continuum of folk, and he sits more towards the rock and pop end of that continuum. Then I bought Miles Davis Kind of Blue because I'm like, it's a classic. I know that digital version, backwards, forwards, left, right, up, down, and sideways. And then the final one I bought, and I think we talked about this in the last episode, when I saw Led Zeppelin 4 sitting there, I thought I've got to get Led Zeppelin 4 because we spoke specifically last time about the mix and the difference between the mix on the vinyl version versus the digital version. Now, obviously, I don't know if they have actually used the original vinyl masters for this copy or not. It is, let me just go grab it. It is a limited edition 40th anniversary or something album. So I'm hoping it's good quality. Let me grab it and just tell you. Go on. Is Led Zeppelin's classic 4th album on 180 gram crystal clear vinyl. I haven't opened it yet, so I hadn't seen that. So apparently it's clear vinyl, which will be interesting. I don't know what that does to the playback, if anything, if the quality of it changes, if it's more...
Makes it more transparent.
It would, I'm sure. I do wonder, though, if it changes the physical properties, like absolutely. The hardness, the brittleness, that'll be interesting. It doesn't tell me anything else. It's just a 180 gram crystal clear vinyl. I thought it
also says here, I think I have the cover, it says remastered and produced by Jimmy Page. So that's a good sign.
That's the one. That is the one.
Unless they just paid him a ton of money to get
to
a rubber
put his
stamp
name
on
on
the
it.
front, but
Yeah,
I guess
that's
we can
possible.
find out.
Or they send him a digital copy and said, "Here, listen to this," and he's never actually heard it on the vinyl. Who
Oh my
knows?
gosh. And then if
And
you
then
have the,
yep.
we could put into Discogs.
So while you're looking it up, I'll just finish the list for those listening. So then the other two albums that I already had at home is I've got Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell. It's a 180 gram virgin vinyl pressing in high quality or heavy quality sleeves. Apparently it's a limited edition one. And I've got the Easy Beats, Gonna Have a Good Time, which is the complete US and UK singles collection. And it sounds as bad as I remember it would. When we got home, Xander and I pulled out the Fio turntable that I'm going to be reviewing soon, and because he's never experienced a turntable before, so I thought this will be a fun experience for him, and he did love it. And so I played Bad Out of Hell, I played the Easy Beats, and I played the Bernard Fanning album. So they're the three that got a run. And yeah, the Easy Beats is definitely not a good test of whether vinyl sounds better than digital, because they both sound horrible because they're old recordings that weren't particularly well made in the first place. But good music.
So were those Bad Out of Hell and Easy Beats? These were the two that you were given at your 21st birthday. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, and they've been in the garage in a plastic container, like one of those clip lock storage bin things. Not a sealed container, just in the sense that not airtight or anything. Just a it has a lid on it that doesn't fall off unless you choose to remove the clips. And they've just been sitting out there for as long as we've been at this house and wherever they were before that. So I was shocked that they're actually still in really good condition. And yeah, played beautifully. One of the albums, it was actually the Bernard Fanning one. This surprised me. When it came out of the packet, some of the you know how the vinyl disc itself is inside the paper sleeve.
Yes.
Some of that sleeve had stuck to the vinyl.
Ooh.
And I had to kind of clean it fairly aggressively with the record cleaning brush to get it clear before I put it on the turntable. So I don't know if you've experienced that before. I don't know if that's a common thing with modern vinyl or if it was just a random situation. I don't know.
I have not experienced that before. That is interesting. So while you were talking, I just entered in what is the code? Let me get this right. I think it's called the catalog number.
Mm-hmm.
For the version that you purchased. And I'm looking at
you sent me Zeppelin 4, yeah?
Yes, Led Zeppelin 4. Now, you sent me a photo of it when you bought it. So
yes.
That was the one that's the right one.
Yep.
Okay, so that is referred to as the untitled album. And it's a worldwide release as opposed to specifically for one country from 2023. And if we go into Discogs, we can actually see some reviews for it. The very first review here says, the music is 10 out of 10, but this pressing is definitely a colder, bright listen with thin, low end.
Oh, no.
However, the very next review says, this is an excellent pressing of an album that never sounded amazing, at least as far as I've heard. My copy was extremely quiet and the clear vinyl is sweet. Sounds as great as the album can. Amazing album. Then the next one is, I'm not going to read them all, but the next one is on the bright side, but clean. So there you go. Okay. So two people saying that's sort of a bit bright, if nothing else, it's clean. Yeah, interesting.
It's sounding like it might have been built on the digital remaster, because this is the whole argument that Peter Como had. That was what I referred to in the last episode, where he was saying that on whatever vinyl version he was listening to, and I dare say it would have been a while back, he noticed that the drums, John Bonham's drums, were so much stronger and more present than in the digital version. What they're describing there makes me think it's probably going to be akin to the digital, so that's something I'll have to, like, when I do get this out to do the test with the Fio turntable, I'm going to do turntable version, digital version, and see how they compare, which is going to be hard because I've got two different mediums, two different playback devices, but hopefully I can draw some parallels between them.
Yeah, it's interesting. It does look like the consensus here, and there are some mixed reviews. There really is.
It's audio.
There's a couple of people here that say it's terrible, and then there's some people here that say it's amazing. I would say a consensus here is perhaps that it is a bit maybe a little thin or in the low end, and bright, but clean and clear, which is great. There is a comment here that says, I don't know why they let Jimmy Page produce anything. He's clearly not a qualified sound engineer. That might be a bit harsh.
Point, but a fair point at the same time.
Potentially. So did you get a chance to put them side by side, or you haven't done that?
I haven't yet. So, and there's a part of me that I was holding back on even opening, Kind of Blue and the Led Zeppelin album because I was. This brings us to another point I want to talk about, which is the sheer expense of vinyl. So an outing to the shop to buy 3 albums that are not particularly special albums, plus a cheap, not the cheapest, but they had 2 options and I bought the more expensive one, but a cheap record cleaning brush, and that's 220 or 230 Australian dollars gone. And like that in itself, I walked out going, my mind's made up. I don't need to pursue vinyl. I don't have any desire to spend this much money on music. If anything, I'd prefer to go down the CD path and buy actually I've already got a nice CD transport and then just buy CDs because they're easier to store, they're way cheaper, and for me, I've found that they generally sound as good, if not better, than streamed music. And you can still enjoy, depending on the way your transport's designed, you can still enjoy that little bit of a ritual of having to take out the CD and first of all, choose the CD, take it out, put it into the player. And so you get that ritualistic experience, and I really enjoyed that side of it. I didn't like the hassle of having to do multiple steps, but enjoyed
I got to jump in, Locke. Why is it? This is, again, I think if people heard the first episode, they'll know I'm not an expert here. I'm barely above novice. What is a CD transport?
Ah, yes, good question. So I've done it
because all of a sudden I'm back in your mirage with the books in my lap of 200 shiny plastic discs, and we're trying to find the next album to put into the Alpine.
So I've done for anyone interested, I've done a full video about this on my YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, that's right. I have seen that video. It is fantastic. But please remind me of it again. No, I haven't seen it. I'm sorry, I haven't seen that one. I'm sorry.
I'm just letting people know that if they want the deep dive, there's a 12-minute odd video that talks about this and what matters and doesn't matter and what you should think about if you are choosing a transport. So when someone says a CD transport or any sort of transport, what they're referring to is the device that is delivering digital files or digital audio, but does not have the DAC or the digital to analog converter built in. So there's CD players where you've got the RCA output to take the music. So a bit like we were talking about with your turntable, and I'm going to muddy the waters a bit here because a turntable is not a transport, and I'll explain why in a second. But in your turntable, you've got RCAs that come out of your turntable and will go straight into either an amplifier or a phono preamplifier if you need a phono preamp. In the case of a transport, like a CD transport, or some streaming devices these days would be considered transports because they only have digital outputs. So they have an optical output, the coaxial, like the single RCA output or USB output. Those are transports. And the way I think about it is just transporting the file. It's not doing anything with it except transporting the file and handing it off to the rest of your system.
Whereas would it be more accurate to say that it's transferring the stream as opposed to the file?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Oh, interesting. So you have a CD transport, which means it's got the laser.
Mm-hmm.
Laser. The laser is firing its bit. It's firing its stream. No, I don't want to use that word. The laser is firing. It's hitting the grooves in the CD. It's reading what's written on the disc, and then that information is not then being turned into an audio signal. That information stays in that sort of raw, optically read stream, and then goes somewhere else. And then something else turns that into an audio signal. Is that right?
Exactly.
Now, that sounds like a lot of extra work. Why would you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally speaking, in audio, and this is becoming less of a hard and fast rule in my experience in recent times, because I think technology is getting better with things like power supplies and isolation of noise and stuff like that. The best explanation and argument that I've ever come across for why you want a transport actually there's 2 arguments as to why you'd want a CD transport or a streaming transport. So I've got here a Volumio Revo Plus streamer, and it's what I would call a streaming transport in the sense that it does not decode the signal for you, just like what you explained. It just sends out the bits, the ones and the zeros. It sends it onto the next device. So it'll connect to Spotify, for instance, or Cobas or Tidal, and it'll say, give me the data, and it will then say, right, so I'm going to send out 111001001 off to the DAC downstream.
Digital solo.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. And so, and so the idea of doing that is that the two things, that the most easy and obvious one is that a dedicated device with its very own inboard DAC chip is generally going to be a better unit than if it's crammed into another box, because no one wants to buy a huge, great big box that's heavy and that's really expensive. And so if you're buying it as an all-in-one device, so let's say it's a CD player, what they'll often do is they'll make compromises by using a power supply that is shared both between the reading of the disc but also the decoding of the signal. And unfortunately, those different sorts of power supplies, you'd optimize them if you were separating them completely, but then you'd need two different power supplies. Then you've got the issue of just the compromise of space. So if you're buying a CD player that you don't want to be twice the size, they have to compromise on the circuit to fit it all into that box. So you've got compromises on space and circuit design as a result. And then, as I've already alluded to, so they sort of cross over. When you go and you separate the two of them out, all of the circuitry is bespoke for the purpose that it is designed to do. So the power supply is bespoke for the spinning of the CD and the driving of the laser, versus in the DAC, it's bespoke for feeding really, really clean voltage into the DAC chip. Something else that goes on in DACs, and I won't go too far down the rabbit hole here, but this will just paint the picture of why it all matters. In DACs, what matters the most of everything from everything I've ever looked into is the timing. And so there are little oscillating chips in DACs which regulate the timing. It sort of becomes a reference point for the DAC to go, I know how often each hundredth of a second should occur. And a bad power supply, a noisy power supply, noise coming from other components can influence that. So if you think about if you're driving an electric motor inside of a CD player that's whizzing around thousands and thousands of times a second to spin your disc, that's probably producing, and again, I'm not an engineer, but I'm guessing it's producing some form of electromagnetic radiation around it. That could influence things like the clock circuit if it's all built into one box. That's going to throw off your timing, which is going to mean a slightly lesser sound quality coming out the other end. So it's all about optimization of the circuits is really the long and the short of it.
Got it. And I guess it wasn't until you talked about there's a motor. There's an electric motor in a CD player or something spinning the CD.
Yep.
And that, as you say, even with fantastic shielding, could create some sort of electromagnetic interference, which could then impact other componentry that's nearby. So that I get that. That sort of makes sense. This leads me to a question which I think we're going to cover quite a bit on this podcast is, how do you know, though, if this sort of interference, unless, if there's if there's a giant ground loop or something, or, there's visible sparks, like that's obviously a clue. But how do you know, and I'm more posing this as sort of more of a rhetorical, maybe not a rhetorical, but like as a broad, long question, is how do you know when there's some amount of interference, some amount of something that's getting in the way that is then worth the added investment and time to go and try and get rid of that? Because, I mean, if you have an answer and you want to jump in with it, of course, but like the reason why I sort of wanted to pose that question is, one of the things I was going to do in this episode is I was going to walk you through my equipment. But one of the questions is, when I tell you some of the equipment that I have, how do I know when and where and how to change or upgrade something, or maybe even just connect it differently? Because to my relatively untrained ear, sounds pretty good. And I don't know, is that is probably the eternal question, right? For audiophiles is how to know when you can make something better. And then you get into the more of the question of, okay, but is it worth it?
Yeah, and I think some audiophiles should be asking the question of how to know when, because they just want to keep buying gear and they don't really think about it.
Right. Well, that's something in and of itself.
So that's a different extreme of that continuum. So if that's you, if you're listening and that's you, take a breath. You don't need the next best thing, because the other thing I was going to say related to that is, the first thing I always think about is, are you enjoying the music? If you're enjoying the music, that's like, you're there, you're happy, you're done. And so I always try to, and this is a constant challenge for me on the YouTube channel, because I'm always reviewing new gear. but I also want people to look at it through the lens of, if you're enjoying your music, that's the bit that matters.
Yep.
Don't feel the need to upgrade all the time. But that's two ends of the extreme. So we've got the manic audiophile, and I've been one of them. You've got the manic audiophile where it's like, I've got to get the next thing. I've got to get the next thing. You've got the, I'm just happy listening to what I've got now because it sounds good, and that's wonderful. And then somewhere in the middle, I think, is a really, for those wanting to expand their audiophile experience, there's a nice healthy middle ground, which I think is what you're asking here. And where it gets tricky, and so I'm not going to try to answer it completely here and now. I'll give a starting answer, partly because I have no answer, but I think it'll be really good to journey through this and to talk about your system in a second. The way I look at it is that how you know if there's noise in the system is when you hear something better and that noise is no longer evident. That's the only way you can really know. And sometimes that means buying the gear. Sometimes that means talking to someone else who's tried your gear and something else, and they can say, oh, this is what I experienced. And that could be a reviewer. You know, I don't trust all the reviewers out there, but I do trust some of them because I've spent long enough watching them and listening to them or reading their stuff to know that I get where they're coming from consistently, like I can relate to what they're saying. So one of the final thing I want to mention before we do a walkthrough of your setup is I get asked this question all the time on the channel lately because I've started talking more about the importance of noise, because it's started to become evident to me that that's really the key. And people keep going, but I'm not hearing any noise in my system, so it's clearly not a problem. And I'm like, that's the problem. That's the challenge, is that the noise we're talking about here is noise at an electrical level, not at an audible level. And so it's enough that it can throw off the tiniest bits of accuracy of timing. And I did another video recently based on a whole lot of research. So it's based on a meta-analysis that a scientist has gone out there and pulled together. I think it was 215 or 250 different studies. And one of the really big takeaways from it is that our brains are so sensitive to the tiniest variations of auditory information, down to, we're talking literally 1/1,000,000th of a second type of sensitivity. And so if you have electrical noise coming through your USB cable, for instance, that noise will be influencing the accuracy of the clock in your DAC, which means that if the samples are meant to be evenly spaced, most of the time maybe they are, but just every now and again, one of them's 1/1,000,000th of a second in the wrong direction. And that is enough for our brains to go, that's not quite as natural as it should be. Not consciously, we don't hear it and go, oh, that timing's wrong, because we're not conscious at that level. It's all incredibly complex processing that our brains are doing, but it's enough that we don't hear it as being as natural. We hear things like a flatter soundstage, or we have more trouble differentiating where the trumpet's coming from versus where the guitar's coming from. They start to blend together and blur together a little bit in space out in front of us in that sort of mental sonic image. So they're all subconscious and unconscious things, but they all come together to make that more natural listening experience. But as I said, the only way to know is to have a listen and go, this one sounds better than this one. Therefore, it's probably doing a better job at timing accuracy, noise rejection, noise filtering. Even this is where it gets confusing and challenging, is that it might not be about noise per se. It could be that device B is actually more responsive than device A and is able to deliver that timing information more accurately. So things like the transistors in an amplifier, how quickly they can ramp up and down the voltage as the signal changes, that's going to influence what we're hearing as well. And it's all tied back to timing. So timing and noise are kind of the two key factors that I've come across that make sense to me.
I'm very intrigued and excited to explore that question with you for my own equipment and my own sort of listening as we venture down this track. Before we do that, you mentioned that your Bernard Fanning Tea and Sympathy vinyl album, it does say here on Discogs that your experience of sort of cardboard dust or the sleeve sticking to the record apparently has been noticed by other people.
Interesting. Okay.
So apparently, if you clean it up with an ultrasonic cleaner or even just a regular sort of vinyl cleaner, it's fine. But perhaps some sort of idiosyncrasy or issue with storage or transport, don't actually know what's going on there. But that was interesting. And then I wanted to ask you what.
if I can jump in on that one really quickly,
Yeah,
I did want to flag this for other listeners. My big takeaway from that conversation that we had earlier, which I forgot to mention, was I'm not going to buy another album until I check Discogs. That's been my biggest learning here. If I do buy any more vinyl, I'm definitely checking Discogs first.
I'm not yet an aficionado of the Discogs system to work out how to sort of sort them to identify which is the best version.
Okay.
But leave that one with me. But I did want to ask you about your Kind of Blue, because I also have Kind of Blue on vinyl, and I have Kind of Blue on CD, and I have a couple. I think I have 2 versions of it on CD, and I have Spotify, which is my streaming platform of choice, at least for now. And playing it on vinyl is just sublime. So if you want to tell me your catalog number, which might read something like SVL 62066, or maybe it could be CS 8163, or it could also be a big long number that starts with 8888751111921.
That's exactly the one. Yep.
All right, hang on. Can you read that? I sort of half made that one up. Could you read it to me?
If you did, you got it literally right. 88751.
Yep.
11921.
Okay, so you have the Columbia. It says here it's the Europe. Columbia Europe
some of the
pressing.
Yeah, some of the copyright information down the bottom mentions made in the EU.
It looks like there's. Do you know what the color of vinyl? Oh, maybe they're different colored vinyl.
I'm going to.
Okay, so it looks like there's white, clear, blue transparent, blue marbled.
That would be cool. I'm going to mute myself while I open it because nobody wants to hear that through a microphone.
We're not doing an ASMR.
I can leave it. I can always mute this in post if I need to.
Yeah.
Is it tingles up the spine or nails down a chalkboard?
I'm immune.
Okay, moment of truth. How boring! It's black. Plain old
black, is it?
Plain old.
Well, there might be another sort of identifier on the back. So that 888 number, was there something else with it? That
there is a number stamped into the vinyl.
Oh, what's that?
Don't you hate it when all the numbers could be either way? It's all 8 6s, 9s, and 0s, so I have no idea whether it's 9 6 or 6 9 all the way through it. That's got the 888 number again. Okay, so now I know which way up it is. Another number that's stamped into it is, it looks like it's 60698 dash Roman numeral 4.
That is the 2017 European release on stereo 180 gram vinyl.
So, question for you,
that's interesting,
Nick, and then we probably should do your system walkthrough unless we're going to hold it. Unless we're going to hold it for next episode, which we could do.
No, we can do.
But while we're on the topic of vinyl and stuff, I noticed that. Hang on, I'm just going to make a noise. That was not my pet pig. That was the vinyl sliding back into its protective plastic. Yes, what I was going to ask you, I keep noticing references to things like 180 gram vinyl. What's good, what's bad, what is it? I'm guessing it just talks about the weight of the actual vinyl disc, but what's good and bad in terms of vinyl weights?
I know very little about the answer to this question, other than when albums are reissued and remastered, 180 grams is considered the sort of, I've seen a lot of marketing refer to it as the audiophile sort of format, and 180 grams, I believe, and we can cut this out if I'm wrong, I believe refers to the mass of vinyl that comes out of the little chute before they stick it on the press and actually press into it and then trim it.
Right.
And that is more than what was standard.
Okay.
And let me tell you what was standard
So it's
before.
going to give you I would imagine it's going to give you a more stable platform on the platter. Like the heavier album is going to help to reduce vibration.
Yeah, so in when vinyl first sort of came out in the 30s and the 40s, all the way really up to sort of the 80s, the standard variation in the amount of vinyl that was used, or at least the mass of that vinyl, was anywhere from like 120 to 150 grams.
Oh.
And then the standard is 140. So if you're just buying a standard vinyl record, it's going to average out about 140. But then if you are buying like an audiophile version, or which they sort of refer to as heavyweight, it's 180 grams and sometimes goes as high as 200.
Okay.
And my very limited understanding, but this is probably a good homework question for me for next episode. I'm going to go back and read up and see if I can sort of learn a bit more about it. Is that, yeah, the more vinyl, the thicker the medium, and then, potentially, you have more shielding is the right word, but the distance between the grooves on side A and the grooves on side B is obviously going to be greater, and perhaps there's the ability to just sort of the grooves themselves may end up being sort of stronger because there's sort of more material there and it's less brittle. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm going to go and read up and come back to you and find out if I was right or not.
That can be your topic to lead into for next episode. Is, does thicker vinyl improve anything other than just having a weightier disc, or is it more than that? Would be really cool to know.
Yes.
And so looking at the time, let's get into your system.
All right.
We'll introduce people to your system, maybe talk briefly about it, and then we'll finish up today's episode and save it for next week as we maybe dive a bit deeper into weight of vinyl and your system in a bit more detail. But let's give us a tour.
Right. So there's a great subreddit on Reddit called Budget Audiophile, and I have visited that subreddit many times, and I would consider myself a budget audiophile, perhaps in the sense that definitely appreciate good quality stuff, have not been able to put the time and energy to learn about all the different components and where best to invest. And in what order to invest, and then also, understanding how to tell if I have reaped the rewards and the benefits from that investment.
Yep.
And so therefore, instead of shelling out tons of money, I'm sort of more on that. I'm in that budget audiophile category. I try not to impulse buy stuff. I do sort of try and sort of read up a little bit and make sure I'm being a bit more educated. Having said that, that's my preamble. So the three bits of equipment that I think are probably most relevant for now is my amplifier. So I bought off Amazon. The brand is called Dayton Audio, and the model number is HTA100, and it is an integrated stereo hybrid tube amplifier for 100 watts, class AB, and it has some tubes. It has a tube preamp. The reviews were fantastic. I thought the connectivity was fantastic. It has, if I just sort of can zoom in here so I can sort of see the back of it. So it has a PC USB in. So if you want to have a USB source, has optical, not Toslink. Is it Toslink?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Optical input. It has a subwoofer out. It has a coaxial in. It has an RCA auxiliary in, and it has an RCA phono in, and then it's just a stereo output. But it also has a built-in Bluetooth receiver, which I thought was kind of cool, although I sort of don't really need to use that. But compact package, very good reviews. $250 is what I think I spent for it. That's US, and that was a couple of years ago, so I'm not quite sure how that translates to these days. But that's my stereo amplifier. Mm-hmm. My speakers I've had for about 20 years. Now, these were a bit more of an impulse buy. I was living in Singapore at the time, and there was a sort of more of a higher end audio store that was going out of business. Although it took them like 3 or 4 years to actually go out of business after I bought these speakers. But what I bought from them were some Infinity Primus 360 tower speakers, and I think you're saying before we started recording, Infinity were bought up by Harman.
Yeah,
so I'm not sure if the
heaps of brands now.
Infinity brand still exists, but these are let's see, they're a tower speaker. I'm just trying to find the three-way specs if I can.
Yeah, I've got it open here from before.
Great.
They're a 3-way bass reflex, so a ported design.
Yep.
They've got a total of 4 drivers. So obviously it looks like a pair of woofers is 1 way, a tweeter, and then a mid-range driver are the other 2. Quoted frequency response, which never really means much, is 38 to 20,000 hertz. 8 ohm impedance, which is pretty standard, and that's just a nominal impedance. For those not familiar, it fluctuates all over the place, but they just have to find a sort of a central point to go, this is what it is at this frequency. And sensitivity of 93 decibels, which means they're nice and sensitive. They're quite a high sensitivity speaker, which is what you want, particularly for a tube amp like what you've got that's not going to pump out buckets of power. That's going to be a good match, and we can talk about that in detail. So if anyone just heard me say those things and go, why, how, what, we will cover that.
And I will say, I really like them. I've had them for, I said, about 20 years. I don't currently have a subwoofer. I'm sure I would absolutely love having a sub plugged into this, and I'm sure I would feel it and it would be fantastic. But these are in my living room, and so at least half the time that these are being used, it is my daughters telling Alexa to play some horrible pop song on Spotify, and we're just pumping them very loudly and dancing like goobers, before bed. And then the other half is when I am intentionally putting on a record, whether that's to listen to at dinner time or with friends over or something like that. And so in those two scenarios, I'm very, very happy with them. They can get very loud, and at volume, they appear to be quite clear and quite responsive and lovely. And as I said, I'm very happy with them. I'm not looking for an excuse to get rid of them. I'm not looking for an excuse to upgrade, but I would love to learn more about my equipment and where there might be opportunities for improvement.
Yep.
And I think the first thing that I might need to think about improving, if it's not the whole thing, it might be parts, is my turntable. So I bought a turntable because I was given a vinyl record, which, I think I talked a little bit about my origin story in the last episode. And I really just was like, what's sort of a good quality entry level with maybe the ability to replace some of the parts at some, upgrade some parts in the future. And so I got an Audio Technica. So I know Audio Technica as to me, at least, I was like, that's a brand I know and I trust. They make good stuff. And I bought the AT LP60 USB. And I'm so far sort of happy with it, with sort of two big caveats. One is that, it doesn't have on the back of the player. It has a phono out, but the cable is built into the player, so I can't use my own. I can't use my own cable. The cable it's actually physically attached to somewhere into the guts of the record player, and then it comes out the back. You can't disconnect it.
Like a crappy black shielded old school.
It's
wire?
A crappy black shielded.
Yeah.
I was really disappointed partly in myself because I didn't dig in enough. And here can I share my screen just so you can see it through the podcast? So the cable, no matter what you do, the only way to get sound out of this thing is either use the USB PC. It's a USB B plug or port, I should say. And then the only way to get sound out is to use the built-in cable, and it's this crappy little black cable, and this little switch here just either switches from line or a phono out. And so this is, tell me how this works. My understanding is that there's some sort of preamp in there, and then if it's in phono, it's going to be outputting a slightly amplified signal. But if it's in line, there's no preamp, and it's just sending a raw signal out.
So the idea is that you've got because the vibrations of the needle on a turntable are so tiny that you need to have a lot of amplification. And so that's why if you look at the back of an amplifier like yours, or for people that have got an AV receiver that might have this, there's always, if you've got it at all, there'll be a clearly identified phono input. And the whole idea of having a phono input is that's got extra gain added to it in many cases compared to a traditional input. So if you go and plug your CD player, if you've got a CD player with an RCA output, if you plug that into the phono input, it's often going to sound horrible and distorted because it's over amplifying that signal, because it's designed to amplify the teeny tiny signal coming from a turntable. So there's three ways I'm aware of to deal with the vinyl output. One of them is having like the switch that's on the back of your turntable that does internal preamplification of that signal. So it makes it loud enough to go into any RCA socket on a normal amplifier. Then you've got the idea of having a dedicated phono stage in the amplifier. So basically all you're doing is choosing whether the phono preamplification happens in the turntable or whether the phono preamplification happens in the amplifier. Or the third option is in the middle, where you actually go and buy a dedicated phono stage, which is essentially a high-quality preamplifier that sits between your turntable and your amplifier, and it takes care of that initial extra gain that's required.
That makes sense. So, I think one of the questions that I have is how much quality and here I'd love to learn the correct taxonomy in the industry here. So when I see that built-in black crappy cable into the back of and the fact that I can't connect my own higher quality cable, that in and of itself is a bit of a red flag to me, and that I am now limited. I'm now limited that it can only be so good because that's a part of the sort of signal chain that I can't influence.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't know how to think about how bad that is, right? Like, I don't lose sleep over it, but I look at that and I go, oh, I really wish I had bought a vinyl record player that gave me the ability to have whatever cable I want and potentially sort of, have a higher quality one. So is it an issue? And that's sort of question one. And then question two is, maybe if it's not an issue, should I be using the phono out or the line out? How do I then work out where I'm going to get a better quality signal or a better quality output? Partly what I want to explore with you is how do I get the best sound out of the gear that I already have?
Yep.
And then how do I think about where are the areas that I should think about upgrading? I haven't even talked, it's all stock, right? That's the stock stylus. That's the arm. I haven't done any calibration. Like that's just it out of the box. And I've been enjoying it. I've been having fun with it. But I am cognizant of the fact that there's possibly opportunities here to make things better.
Yeah.
And if I can, I want to do that.
So I reckon I'm going to answer one of those questions with a homework activity for you.
More homework.
You've got two things to do for homework. One of them is to find out about the weight of vinyl. And the other thing to do to answer your question, the best way you can work out which way to use it, whether you should do the line output or the phono output, is to just try both. So sit down with a record that you really like and you want to listen to kind of at quality, and that you're happy to listen to a couple of times because you're going to have to listen to the same track a couple of times on it. And try it once as you currently have it set up, which I think, have you got it set up now currently as phono output or line output? As in
phono right now.
And so that's going into the
phono input on your amplifier.
Amp. Cool. So have a listen to it like that. Listen to the track.
Yep.
Give yourself time, like listen to the entire track through. Pay attention to as much as you can of the music. Think about details, soundstage, tonal quality, general, like how you feel listening to it. And then go back and do it again, but now switch the switch on the back of the turntable and change the input over to a regular input on the back of your amp, not the phono input, and play it again. And so that's going to tell you which preamp is doing a better job with that signal. And chances are it's going to go one of two ways. You're either going to play it and go, yeah, they're both much of the same, and that's helpful, or you're going to listen to it and go, wow, the built-in preamp's way better than what's in my amp, or vice versa. The amp's doing a much better job. So that sets you off on part one, and it's a free upgrade if you happen to find that the other option is better than what you currently have now. You've just got a free upgrade.
Absolutely. Love it. That's my homework. I'm going to do it. So if there is a phono stage, which is ultimately it is a preamp, correct?
Yep.
Is that the right way to think of it? Mm-hmm. So a phono stage preamp that's built into the vinyl, the record player, and then it is going into a phono input channel on my amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two rounds of amplification happening, right? There's the phono stage amplification to create that phono signal,
mm-hmm.
and then that then gets amplified through the amplifier. Is that right to think of it as two stages of amplification?
Yeah,
so like an initial amplification of the signal and then the amplification out through the speakers?
Yeah. So if you think about it as 100% of what you want is what's coming out through the speakers. Funnily, I've just produced a video on this that went out the other day that explains how the amplifier works from the moment the signal comes into the output. So people that want to know this, what I'm about to say in more detail, go over to YouTube and watch, what did I end up calling it? I think it's just how amplifiers work and why they actually make the sound quieter or something to that effect.
All right, cool.
It's a recent one. Go to Passion for Sound on YouTube and it's in the last few videos released if you're listening to this in early February of 2025. So if 100% is what's coming out at the speakers, what's going on inside the amplifier is, for the sake of this conversation, is it's going to take it from, say, 50% incoming signal to that 100%. So if it's coming straight from a CD player or a streaming source of some sort, it's coming in at kind of a 50% level and it needs to be boosted to 100%. That's what your amplifier is doing. When we go to phono, though, because what we said before about the teeny tiny vibrations coming off that needle, think of it as coming out of the turntable at 10%, coming out of the needle at 10%. Right. And so you need the phono preamp to essentially go from 10% to 50%.
Yep.
And then the amplifier goes from 50% to 100% in very rough arbitrary terms.
That is fantastic. But my question was going to be, if I have the option to skip the phono stage in the record player and just have a line out that then goes straight into a line channel on the amplifier, would that be just on paper the best thing to do, because there's now just one amplification stage as opposed to two?
There's not. So this is the trick. So the 10% to 50% part is just being done by an extra bit of circuitry inside your turntable. So somewhere off in the corner of your turntable inside its chassis, there'll be a little phono preamp board. And when you're flicking the switch on the back of your turntable, either you're saying send that low-level 10% signal straight out, or no, I want you to send that 10% via this extra circuit, which is going to turn it to the 50% and then send that 50% onto my amplifier. So either way you're doing it, you're just choosing where it's being done.
I get that, and I think my question is, if I go phono stage and then phono stage in the record player and then phono channel on my amp. This is a very crude explanation, but there's two lots of amplification happening. There's the 10% that comes out of the stylus, which then gets boosted to 50 in the phono stage, and then the last 50 is happening in the stereo amplifier. But if I skip the phono stage and I just take the line out, I flick that switch and I'm getting just the 10% of the signal, then it's just my amplifier that's having to get me from 10% to 100. Now, I would have thought that the fewer amplification stages, the fewer times that you amplify the signal, the better. Because every time you amplify the signal, you're potentially bringing in noise and all that kind of stuff.
Losing signal quality,
But maybe that's not true. And so that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Like, just on paper, should I be using the built-in phono stage, or should I be turning that off and just taking the line out and then just amplifying the line out signal?
So the trick here, and without knowing your amplifier specifically, this being the Dayton Audio one, without knowing that specifically and not knowing exactly how it works, my assumption is that when you're plugged into the phono input on that, it will have its own dedicated phono stage circuit doing the 10 to 50% bit. And so what I'm saying is that the decision you're basically making, let's just say that we know that the amplifier, the main amplification circuit in your Dayton Audio amp is doing 50 to 100. That's all it's doing. It cannot do 10 to 100. It can only do 50 to 100.
All right.
And so what the decision is that we're making is we're saying your turntable has a little circuit to do the 10 to 50, and your Dayton phono input, like the phono input socket on your Dayton Audio amplifier, that theoretically should also have a 10 to 50 circuit attached to it. And so all you're doing is you're choosing which of those circuits to use. There's no way that you can do it that is going to completely bypass that process, because it has to happen. It has to boost the signal to that 50% before that 50% goes through the main amplification stage in your amp. So that the question here is, which device has a better quality phono preamp built in? Is it your turntable or is it the Dayton Audio? My money's on the turntable being better.
All right. All right.
So yeah, I reckon that's for next episode is vinyl weights, and you can let us know which device did a better job of the amplification. And I think we might have to start dabbling a little bit with cables next episode, and I'm reluctant to go too deep into cables too early, but I think it'll be interesting to talk about in the context that where the preamplification is being done for your turntable will also influence the behavior of the cables, because cables, what makes a cable good or not so good is its ability to have the voltage fluctuations essentially travel through it. And my understanding of it from talking to people and just reading up is that cables can behave differently depending on the amplitude of the signal going through them. So if you've got a 0.5 volt signal going through it compared to a 3 volt signal going through it, the cable can actually behave differently. Or not that the cable behaves differently, but the outcome at the other end, things like signal loss. Inside of a cable, there's stuff like called capacitance, where any cable wants to actually hold on to some of the signal. And so when they're designing cables, they're trying to balance how easily it conveys the signal, how little or how much it holds onto the signal, all that sort of stuff. And that's going to vary, as far as I understand, with the amount of voltage going through. And so depending on the position of that switch is going to change also how that cable interacts with your system. So we might need to talk about that a bit next episode, but let's hold that back till we have at least one variable out of the way.
I love it. And then should we end the episode with sharing, just sort of, an album or something that we've just listened to or
why
bought?
not?
Or
why not? Let's do it.
Well, I might just share 3 of the most recent editions that I've purchased, and none of these are new. These are all secondhand that I've purchased, and I did get it through. I did find the folks through Discogs, and I think I don't know if I mentioned this in the first episode. I think I did, in that I made the observation of living in America. I had access to essentially Australian artists and Australian releases sitting in people's collections, in American collections, where there's not a lot of demand for them, and so I'm able to get access to some of my favorite artists and their favorite releases for not a lot of money, which is the exact opposite of what you're facing in terms of walking into your music store and having to spend $100 on a single album. So the last 3 that I just purchased were 3 Australian artists. Surprise, surprise! I got Ian Moss, who is the lead guitarist from
Cold Chisel.
Cold Chisel. His album from 1989 called Matchbook, which I think this is the original release of that album. I've got to look up a bit more and find out if this is the first pressing or not. But it sounds fantastic. And it is an album that I've owned on CD and stream it a lot and love that. The next album I got, James Morrison's album Snappy Doo.
Another great album. Mm-hmm.
And one that I have loved on CD and loved streaming. And
jazz
just
album,
an incredible,
for those not familiar.
A jazz album, yeah, and not just a jazz album. James Morrison, the Australian jazz musician, who's maybe most famous for playing trumpet, but can pretty much play anything at any level. But on this album in particular, I think it was from 89 or 1990. It's Ray Brown on bass, Herb Ellis on guitar, and Jeff Hamilton on drums.
I've never looked at that.
It's
like all-star.
4 of the greatest jazz musicians to ever live on this album, and it's very obvious when you listen to it on any format, and it's beautiful to listen to on vinyl as well. This is pretty hard to find. I've had this on my wait list for a while, and I almost ordered a copy from Germany, but then one popped up that was a little closer to home, and I got that, so that's great.
Nice.
And then the last I got, which I just had to get for fun, is Slim Dusty live at Wagga Wagga, 1972. Sounds pretty bad. It is certainly not an audiophile recording.
For those not familiar, Slim Dusty is probably the Australian country musician of the older years. Not currently. Obviously, you've got your Keith Urbans and stuff like that, but. Keith Urban or Carl Urban? I can never remember which one's the singer, which one's the movie star. It is
Keith Urban or Mr. Kidman, I think is how he's referred.
So so Slim Dusty's like the old school. He's probably our Willie Nelson in many ways.
That's a great way of putting it. And he was prolific. I think he recorded something like 300 albums or something like that. It was maybe not 300, but he recorded he was prolific. He would sometimes release 3 or 4 albums in a year.
Wow.
And I probably got those numbers wrong, and people can totally correct me. But he was prolific. I saw it was like 68 cents or $1.10 or something like that for a Slim Dusty live at Wagga Wagga. And I lived in Wagga Wagga for many years as well, so I thought I've got to get this and give it a try. That's a nostalgic sort of fun purchase.
Yeah.
How about you? What did you get recently, or what are you listening to?
I'm just going to share one album because I haven't found a lot of gold lately. I've had a whole bunch of albums in my discovery list that I was like, yep, don't need to hear that again. Yep, don't need to hear that again. But the one that I do want to keep listening to is Rag and Bone Man, who I generally love. His last 2 albums, this is his 3rd album I'm about to talk about. His last 2 albums were brilliant, particularly Human was amazing. Life by Misadventure had ups and downs, but was good overall. The new one's really interesting. It's called What Do You Believe In? Now, are you familiar with Rag and Bone Man, Nick? You've probably heard his tracks and not known.
I'm going to look it up really quickly.
Used in shows. I noticed the other day I'm finally getting around to watching Jack Ryan, the series on Amazon Prime, Prime Video, and they used one of his tracks called Human in an early episode in that. So you'll probably have heard his music, and it's great. What's really interesting, though, he's got this deep, gravelly baritone voice. And I guess he's a singer more than a rapper, but he's got that rapper kind of sensibility about his style. He's tats all over him, and his music is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like soul, funk, R&B infusion, the thing. But what was interesting was when I put on What Do You Believe In, there's like a little bit of Gregory Porter. Are you familiar with Gregory Porter at all, the jazz singer?
As you say the name, no.
Okay,
but maybe, maybe I would know it if I heard some songs.
For those that have heard of Gregory Porter, he's a modern jazz singer, baritone, very much like what you think of as a traditional jazz singer. Amazing voice, wonderful music. But what surprised me was that connection when I'm hearing this album, What Do You Believe In, from this tattooed, kind of rough, gruff dude. But I'm hearing these hints of jazz coming through, and he's got this beautiful depth in his voice. And so it's kind of like a funky, hip hoppy R&B album, but it's got, I don't even know how to describe it. It's got some smoothness, just kind of lingering behind the scenes, and it really captured my attention. And I'm excited to go back and listen to it a few more times. And if it becomes more of his, like if he wants to go more back to the Human direction, which was his first album, or go more into this kind of slight jazz feel, I'm excited to see wherever he goes. He's just got an incredible feel. Both the music that he writes is great, but his delivery of it's fantastic, always enjoyable, and relatively well recorded too. I'm not suggesting it's like an audiophile reference type stuff, but it's good enough that on a good system, you're going to get rewarded with a great listening experience, which is always something I enjoy if you can get both of those together. Unlike a couple of albums that I've tried recently, and I'm like, oh God, what were they thinking? So,
well, I'm excited to check that out. And I'm also going to try and hit you with some new music next episode.
So you're going to come back next time and talk about vinyl weights, and as in weight of the actual disc, not weights to go on top of vinyl. That's another conversation.
It is.
And you're going to talk about your experiences with the phono stages, which one did a better job. I don't think I've got any teasers to come back with next time, but we'll just go for another ride and talk more about your system. There's a lot of stuff to talk about with your system, just in terms of things you may or may not have considered. So we'll do that in the next round. We'll dive into some more of that.
And if I could give you a little bit of homework, Locke, I would love to hear your thoughts on A/B testing your 3 vinyl records that you bought with your CD and or digital streaming versions. So
which
Led Zeppelin 4, Kind of Blue, and Tea and Sympathy by Bernard Fanning.
Which I can probably get done before next time, because I'm producing the turntable review hopefully next week. So by the time you and I come back together a fortnight from now, then I should have had time to actually do that testing. So I'll come back and let you know how it goes.
What's interesting, I think, from the Bernard Fanning album is that I believe some of that album he recorded in his home studio, but some of that album he recorded in Peter Gabriel's recording studio set up over in the UK.
Interesting.
So it would be fascinating to know which tracks were recorded, in his bedroom versus in Peter Gabriel's, what I imagine is some amazing state-of-the-art facility, and whether one can sort of hear the difference in that, and then whether that translates to a digital medium versus an analog medium.
Fascinating. I will for sure see if I can find more out about that, because I'd love to just dive into the tracks and go, can I hear a difference? Can I tell?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. So that's our homework and what we're going to bring to next episode. Thanks for the chat, Nick. That was brilliant.
Thank you, Locke.
Talk soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Groove Pod. Until next time, happy listening, and we hope you'll join us again.